We are going to discuss how to grow fruit today, the spiritual fruit that changes the quality of your mind, your life. And I want to begin with the idea that God spoke into emptiness. You can read that in Hebrews 11:3, and He created everything you see. Now, if He can do that with emptiness and create a world that we've not even yet begun to really figure out, then He can also speak into the nothingness of an humble heart and create the fruit that He desires to grow there. The only thing He really needs is our cooperation to do that. I'd like to read 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 7. Paul writes, "But we have this treasure in earthen vessels so that the surpassing greatness of the power will be of God and not from ourselves." We are looking to, may I say, cooperate with God, put ourselves in a place where God can do in our life what God wants to do in our life, and it's about connection. And this connection is vital. We need to read this John 15, verse 1 through 5. He makes it quite clear the vitalness of this connection. He said, "I am the true vine, and my Father is the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away, and every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. You are already clean because the word which I have spoken to you abide in me, and I in you. As the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me." Must stay connected. In verse 5, "I am the vine, you are the branches. He who abides in me and I in him bears much fruit, for apart from me you can do nothing." It is all about having that spiritual connection, being really, truly part of the vine, not just talking about it, but really pursuing and seeking God. So God can create something wonderful in any life. All a person has to do is make their life available to God. And then He will make of that exactly what He wants. And we'll be talking about that fruit as we go on. So our question is, are we trying to produce fruit on our own, which is very common? Or are we an empty vessel in the hands of God who knows how to turn our nothing into a harvest? And I personally want to be that nothing that God turns into a harvest. So let's talk about the source of life. Certainly it is not by grit alone. As He said there, "Abide in me and I in you, as the branch cannot bear fruit of itself unless it abides in the vine, so neither can you unless you abide in me." It's not about pulling it all out and pulling it off by yourself. You don't have to just ruggedly bear through all of this. Abiding, of course, is that daily relationship. It's a steady relationship. I'm thinking Matthew 4:4, "Man doesn't live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God." And just as most of us will eat physical food every single day, we certainly need spiritual food every single day, and I would say repeatedly times throughout the day. So you can be busy. You can be very busy, and you can look very active, and yet you can be alone. The Matthew 7:21 through 23 crowd, they cast out demons, did many wonders, taught many great things. They prophesied. They thought they had it. They were a busy people. And He said, "Depart, I never knew you." The church at Laodicea also. They were a busy people. They had a reputation that they were alive, but Christ said, "You are dead." That's Revelation 3:1. And then a church at Sardis. I may get those two backwards, but Revelation 3:15 and 16. That's the lukewarm church. They thought they were doing okay, but they weren't doing okay. And these are the things that we have to be careful that we're not fooling ourselves and maybe even being in a quiet conspiracy with one another to agree with one another, because our agreement will not outride the judgment or override the judgment of God. So we want a fruit, and our fruit comes from surrender. And the fruit is, we'll go to Galatians 5:22. It's not that hard to understand. In fact, I hope many of you could say, well, you've memorized the fruits here. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control. Against such thing there is no law. Now those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passion and desires. Now That last verse there, this is the important part, because the fruit comes from surrender. As long as we're hanging on to the flesh and trying to live in the flesh or compromise with the flesh, set on the fence, have one foot on one side and one on the other, we can't truly grow the fruit. Now, we can be nice people, we can be kind and polite, but we won't be doing as verse 25 says, if we live by the Spirit, let us also walk by the Spirit. To truly live in that and walk by that is to really give oneself up and say, I am going to be the best Christian I know how to be. And that is a cooperative effort between you and God. He won't force you to do it, but if you're willing to do it, He will gladly walk with you. So we can't bear fruit disconnected is our main point. We really must be diligently seeking God. Hebrews 11:6, right at the end of that verse, he said He's a rewarder of those who diligently seek Him. Now let me flesh that out just a tad. He didn't say He's a rewarder of those who sit on the church pew. Now those who diligently seek Him will sit on the church pew, but it's not just sitting on the church pew. And He didn't say He's a rewarder of those who read their Bible every day. Now those who diligently seek Him will read their Bible every day, but it's possible to study the Bible and not seek God. It's possible to have a prayer life and not seek God. We can't bear fruit disconnected. We must be connected. I don't know any other way to say it. It's almost ineffable that say it at the heart. It is a spiritual connection. So then He comes along and He says He's going to do some pruning. Look back there at John 15. He wants us to bear fruit. This is what it's all about. And He says, I am the true vine and my Father is the vine dresser. I think you got to pause right there a moment. My Father does what? Oh, He does some pruning. He's the vine dresser. Every branch in me that does not bear fruit, He takes away. And every branch that bears fruit, He prunes it so that it may bear more fruit. He's wanting fruit to grow. And of course, if we're on His team, we're wanting fruit to grow. And so the pruning is not punishment, it's purposeful. There are things in our lives that we need cut out so that we can bear more fruit. The problem is we are so close to our own lives and we're so involved with our own lives, it's kind of hard to see what we need to cut out. Now and then we'll do it. But for the most part, we are really great at justifying and rationalizing why the things that we are allowing to stay in our life need to be in our life and are really good for our life. And then God comes along and says, oh no, we need to cut that out. And we surrender and let Him do the pruning that is based on His wisdom rather than our wisdom. So He prunes some habits that we don't need, maybe some attitudes that we have that will not bear fruit. We do things like that to get away from it. Greg, you're going to have to find the mouse, scroll it to the screen. Got it. Good job. System's been giving us trouble. So He's going to prune those habits, and we're going to attitudes, and it's going to make a world of difference. So pruning is to be cultivated. Now, I don't like being cultivated. I don't know about you. Well, let's go back here to Hebrews 12, verse 10 and 11. Here's some of the cultivation that weaves into life. For they discipline us for a short time as seemed best to them, talking about our fathers. But He disciplines us for our good so that we may share in His holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterward it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. There's some things coming in our life, and sometimes they may not always look like it's God's hand. Sometimes we can be a little confused by it. Genesis 50 and 20, this is at the end of Joseph's life, nearing the end of his life. It's really not the exact end, but anyway. And his brothers are afraid that he's going to get vengeance on what they had done to him. And in this verse, he says something that is really neat to understand. He says, well, you meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. Now, this is a big picture that's hard to get your head around, and I'm not going to promise you we can do it. But what Joseph is saying there is, I now understand that the horrible, evil things that happened to me led my life to a better place. When you sold me into slavery, it was a step forward. When Potiphar's wife betrayed me and I had to spend time in prison, it was a step forward. God was pruning and working on me, getting me ready for a position I did not quite anticipate, to be number 2 in all of Egypt. And so Joseph learned to see those things, and it's really kind of hard to do. We want more fruit. We want it. But can we do it without the pruning? Can I climb this ladder without having to go through the training or the hardships or what have you? And the answer is no, not very much. So I want to ask the question, what might change if you saw the cuts of life not as God stepping away, but as God making room for more fruit? What if when life just didn't go the way you wanted it, you were having one of those bad days, and we all have them? What if you could just pause for a minute and go, what's God trying to teach me here? What's God maybe trying to prune away from me that I've been hanging on to, that I need to just sit with a little bit and understand a little better? Joseph did it. And he wasn't talking about a bad cup of coffee or bad service at the restaurant or, the car engine going bad on him. He was talking about some major betrayal. And he came to the point where he said, God meant it for good. I'm going to tell you something short and then I'm going to move on. The narrative you tell yourself about why bad things happen to you, the story you tell yourself, has a lot to do with whether you're going to be happy or miserable. If you tell yourself you're a victim, you're abused, you haven't been treated right, nobody understands me, everybody hates me, you're going to live a miserable life. If you can transition into Joseph and go, God means it for good. I don't understand it yet, but I really believe down the road I'm going to look back and understand that God was doing some cuts so that I could grow more fruit. It's a whole different narrative, and it has a whole different feeling about it. So we want to go beyond just mere rule keeping. You can be obedient. You can be as empty as can be. We all work with people like that. They're good workers. They're good people. They're nice to be around, but they're no more religious than the man in the moon. And then we get all confused because we start thinking work salvation, and we don't believe in work salvation. No one comes to the Father except through Christ, John 14:6. So it's not like you stack up a bunch of good works and go, well, I really like him. He's got to be right because he's such a likable guy. No, he can be right and be a likable guy and go straight to hell too, because without the blood of Christ, no one gets to the Father. And so just being obedience is good, but obedience can be hollow. And we don't want to fall into that trap. Rules can shape your behavior really quickly. You get onto the job, you start learning the rules, right? You understand what the boss wants of you, you understand what the coworkers want of you, and you start behaving accordingly. Now, that doesn't mean you love your job and you're total loyal to the company and you're never going to leave the company. You just learn how to do these things. Rules shape behavior really quickly. I never went to boot camp, but I understand most of the guys that enter boot camp learn really quick that the drill instructor's rules can shape their behavior really quickly, and it can transform them. Does that mean they fell in love with the drill instructor? I have an idea that in most cases the answer to that one is no, that it's not. So our fruit takes time to grow. Now that's Galatians 5:22, which we read just a moment ago, love, joy, peace, and so on and so forth. And it doesn't pop up in a second. Galatians 2:20, Paul says, it is no longer I, but Christ who lives in me. And that takes time. That takes some growing. That's why we desire the sincere milk of the word like babies. And then we start growing from there to get stronger and stronger. And it just takes some time to develop it. So it's an inside job. It's a transformation, which makes me think of Romans 12:2, because he says, be transformed by the renewing of your mind, and you learn to think completely different. We're no longer of this world. We're in this world, but we're not of it. We're just a pilgrim traveling through it. Or as we sang the song, this world is not my home, I'm just passing through. And a pilgrim has a different mentality than somebody who is a resident. And if you can kind of get your head around that one, it's a pretty interesting concept. Because if you're traveling across country, yeah, you're nice. You enjoy the scenery and what have you, but it's not your home. You're just traveling. But if you were a resident of a particular place, you would have a different attitude about it. So holiness, it's more than just avoiding bad habits. Now, please avoid bad habits, and when you recognize them, get rid of them. You don't want to keep bad habits. But just because somebody can say, well, I don't cuss, and I don't smoke, and I don't drink. That used to be the big three anyway back in the 60s. If you can say those three, so what? What does that mean? You can not do those things and be rotten as can be in a lot of other ways. So it's not just avoiding bad habits. 1 Peter 1:15 and 16, he says, be holy as God is holy. This is our training. This is the fruit we're trying to develop. We're trying to learn to imitate God. We'll have that verse in just a minute. So true fruit is just going to grow from the heart. And it's going to be a passionate thing. It's not I got to do it or I'm going to burn in hell forever. That's missing the point. This is an opportunity to discover the likeness of God that was created in us. Genesis 1:26. We were created in His likeness. Sin has marred that likeness. Now let's bring that likeness back out. Let's learn to be like Jesus. That's all the opportunity that we're talking about. And that grows from the heart. It becomes a passion. It would be, I wish, more of a passion than a kid who says, I'm going to be the best baseball player ever. Or the kid who says, I'm going to be the best basketball player ever. And these kids that really fall in love with wanting to be the best basketball player ever, listen to some of the stories of the pros. They were bouncing that basketball every chance they had. They spent time on the driveway with the hoop, and they played and they played and they played till mom forced them to come in. Why? Because it was a passion. They wanted to get to be the best that they could be. They didn't just play once here and there, throw a few shots here and there, play some horse or whatever game they played and thought, well, I practiced. They dedicated themselves to it. And so when we talk about fruit growing from the heart, this is not just, I show up at church now and then. This is, I want this. I want this more than I want anything. So if true fruit is growing, what changes in your reactions and your speech and your inner peace? Now let's carry that home a little bit. I won't stay here long. It's easy to look at it and go, well, that's a neat theory. What's going to change in your reaction? As that fruit is growing, go back to read Galatians 5:22-23. How's that going to affect the way you treat your mate? Right? Love is patient. Love is kind. So on and so forth. It's going to make a difference, isn't it? How's it going to affect your at the workplace? How are you going to deal with the people you work with? In your extended family, and we all have wonderful extended families. We can all tell stories there. But as that fruit is growing, what's going to change in our reaction to other people? In our speech. He says, let no corrupt communication proceed from your mouth. If I'm truly growing the fruit of the Spirit, what's going to happen? It's going to show up in the speech, right? And so you look at those places, where's my speech lacking? About my inner peace. Imitating the Master. We're going to run some verses here. We're going to run about 4 of them, just back to back. 1 Corinthians 11:1. Simple, short verse. If you're into memory verses, I highly recommend that you put this on your memory verse list. Be imitators of me, just as I also am a Christ. That one's not too challenging. No, the concept is challenging. But if you're going to make that a memory verse, that's not so challenging. Ephesians 5:1 and 2. A little bit longer if you're going to do a memory verse. Therefore, be imitators of God as beloved children, and walk in love, just as Christ also loved you and gave himself up for us, an offering and sacrifice to God as a fragrant aroma. Look what he says. Be imitators of God. This is what Christianity gets into about in the depths of it. When he talks about bearing fruit. Let's go to 1 Peter 2:21. 1 Peter 2:21 and 23. For you've been called for this purpose, since Christ also suffered for you, leaving you an example for you to follow in his footsteps, who committed no sin, or was deceit found in his mouth, and while being reviled, he did not revile in return. While suffering, he uttered no threats, but kept entrusting himself to the one who judges righteously. Notice that in verse 21, leaving you an example for you to follow in his steps. And then we'll go back to the Gospel of John, chapter 13. Let's take 3 through 5. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come forth from God and was going back to God, got up from supper, laid aside his garment, and taking a towel, he girded himself, and he poured water in the basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. Now drop down to verse 14. If I then, the Lord and the teacher, washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. I think a lot of people like the idea of imitating Jesus in theory, but when we start thinking about it more practically in action, that's where the rub comes. This is giving up a lot of oneself in order to be like him. That's the connection. It's not just professing his name and singing some songs and dropping some money in the plate. It's, I want to be like him. I want to imitate him. So what would it look like to imitate Jesus in your tone? How do you speak to one another? I definitely won't call out names, but we all have known some brethren who could act pretty good most of the time, but my goodness, could they talk to their mate in a tone of voice that make you want to crawl under the pew, the table, hide, get away. It was like, whoa, wait a minute. What just happened there? And I'm like, I don't know. That ought not to be. That kind of tone ought not to be there. Our compassion, our willingness to take simply of our time and our thought and be considerate of another and validate them with nothing really major here. Sometimes it's going to be a text, a phone call, just a hug. I know you're going through a lot. Just want you to know I'm thinking about you in my prayers. That's compassionate. That's nice, because in a lot of things people are facing, let's be honest, what can you actually do about it? You can't do anything about it except to love and be present. And if you have a close enough relationship, and this varies depending on who we're talking about, but you can be there to be a shoulder for them to lean on. And sometimes people just need to cry, or maybe they need to vent, or they just need someone to listen to them. And that's it. That's good. So what would it look like to imitate Jesus? Whether it's your tone of voice with other people, your compassion, or your willingness to serve. Those are important thoughts. Because if we're bearing the fruit, we're going to see it. And then we work out our own salvation. Drifting doesn't require any effort. You can just drift and drift and drift. That's just really easy to do. But Paul told us here in Philippians 2:12 and 13, and I tie these together because it shows us that it is a cooperative effort again. It's not all God, and it's not all me. It's not all God and all you. It is together. Philippians 2, we'll start there at verse 12. So then, my beloved, just as you have always obeyed, not in my presence only, but now much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. Now, in my version, right there at the end, after the word trembling, it's a semicolon. And he goes on with the sentence saying, for it is God who is at work in you, both to will and to work for his good pleasure. And then he says, do all things without grumbling and disputing. And so we have our part where we obey and we're working it out. And then we have it as God who is working in us. And that is primarily listening to the instruction and the teaching we receive from God. 2 Peter 1, verse 5 through 8. Just a nice little list of things to work on. Now, for this very reason, also applying all diligence, in your faith supply moral excellence. And in your moral excellence, knowledge. Study your book more, right? And in your knowledge, self-control. You don't have to say everything that comes to your mind, right? And in your self-control, perseverance. And in your perseverance, godliness, in your godliness, brotherly kindness, and your brotherly kindness, love. For these qualities are yours and are increasing. They render you neither useless nor unfruitful in the knowledge of our Lord Jesus Christ. Now notice, we won't be unfruitful. This is all about growing fruit. It's that connection. That's where we started in John 15, 1 and 2. He prunes so that we can bear more fruit. But he tells us that we have to give all diligence to add these things. 1 Corinthians 9:24 is where we get Paul in his, let's call it the athletic example. For those of you who like sports, this will play a little better. Do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but only one receives the prize? Run in such a way that you may win. Everyone who competes in the games exercises self-control in all things. They then do it to receive a perishable wreath, but we an imperishable. Therefore I run in such a way, not without aim. I box in such a way as not beating the air. And then the one I quote all the time. I discipline my body and make it my slave, so that after I preach to others, I myself will not be disqualified. That's a lot of training. That's what it is. We're working it out. We have a major part to doing this. God's not going to grab us by the ear and drag us off into heaven if we don't want to go. If we don't want to listen, we don't want to do it, guess what? You don't have to. Now, there are consequences to the choice, but you're an adult. You're, as we call it, a free moral agent. You can make whatever choice you want. So normally one moment is not going to change years of bad habit. As you've been sought in your ways, as sometimes we say, we get stuck and you want to get out of it, you want to change. Usually it's going to take a lot of work and effort and persistence. Now, if you get one of those moments, okay, where you get a dramatic, almost instant change, then go for it. Now and then, I've talked to somebody who quit smoking. Now, most people that quit smoking struggled with quitting smoking. That's the common story. But now and then there'd be somebody who quit smoking, said, I just set him down, said, I'm not doing it again. I was done. And they were done. That's not the common story. But if you get to have that experience where you're facing a struggle and you do one thing and you get over it, then great. But if you have to work with it for a while and work with it, that's all right. You keep working at it. Because if you don't give up, I trust you'll find exactly what you're looking for. So where's your fruit the weakest? Now, to go into that question a little bit deeper, go back to Galatians 5:22 through 23. If you want, you could go to 1 Corinthians 13, start at verse 4, the definition of love there, and you could work through it and go, this is where I'm weak. And then, how can you cooperate with the vine dresser? How can you grow? How can you look at life in a different way and go, I think maybe God's doing a little pruning here, or maybe he's doing a little pruning there. And then to identify what he's trying to cut away. The harvest that remains. Your fruit is not the result of your grit alone. It's a cooperative effort with God. And it's going to grow from steadily abiding. You can't pop in and out. You got to stay with it. You got to stay on top of it. And the goal is not just to look busy. Look, if you come here and you sing and you participate and every one of us thinks, oh, you are one of the best saints we have ever met. Well, that's nice. But if God doesn't agree with our assessment, then it's back to the Matthew 7:21 crowd where he said, depart, I know you not. So it's not just looking at on the surface. Don't fall for that. And then pruning's not meant to harm us. It's meant to grow us. And that's one of the lessons that's really hard to learn because none of us like to feel like stuff is taken away. Ultimately, the goal is Galatians 2:20 is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So God can turn our emptiness into a harvest. He can do things we haven't imagined on a spiritual level. The question simply is, will we make ourselves available to him and be a steady, diligent partner with him so he can grow the harvest he wants? If your answer to that question is yes, then stay the course. You're doing what you need to do. If you're not really sure, then you need to find somebody to talk to, and there are plenty of us available. If you know you need to respond to the public invitation, our baptistry's ready. We'll help however we can while we stand and sing.